Thanks for coming. My name is Zena M. Pliska. I'm a proud member of AFT, CFT, and UTLA. I'm a Los Angeles Unified School District TK kindergarten teacher by day and a children's book author by night. Activist organizer for 30 years and a guest blogger at teachingauthors.com. And I'm going to pass it off to Andrea J. Loney.
Good morning, everyone. I am Andrea J. Loney, and I am going to quickly in the chat paste what some of my books are so that you can see what they are. And I am a member of AFT 1521 as an adjunct professor at Los Angeles Trade Technical College and their computer science department. And in the past 17 years, I've taught K-12 classes in corporations at the VA hospitals and jails and rehab centers and also in community colleges. But I'm also here today as a children's book author. I write fiction and nonfiction picture books. I also speak at schools, libraries, and organizations across the country. And Zena, were we going to introduce anybody else at this point, or am I still going?
Benson, nope, Benson's going to introduce himself, and then Sharon's going to introduce herself.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is Benson Shum. I'm an author and illustrator of children's books. I'm also an animator at the Walt Disney Animation Studios. I've been animating for about 20 years, working in live action, visual effects, TV, as well as animated films. I've been with the Disney Animation Studios for 8 years and have been very fortunate to be part of films like Frozen, Big Hero 6, Zootopia, Moana, Frozen 2, and most recently Raya and the Last Dragon. Working in animation, I've always been telling stories, but through movement and acting, but now translating that into text and illustrations as children's book author and illustrator. I published 5 books, and I have a few more books coming out in the next year. And my most recent book, Alex's Good Fortune, was published with Penguin Random House. Thank you. And I think Sharon will be going up next.
Hi, good morning. My name is Sharon Langley, and I'm a 20-year educator, primarily in pre-K through grade 6. And I have been a teacher advisor, a literacy coach, and an administrator in elementary education. I'm a newly published author, A Ride to Remember, with Amy Nathan and illustrated by Floyd Cooper. And I do have a new book coming out, but in this business, there's some things you can't tell just yet. So I am happy to introduce our panelist, Zena M. Pliska, and she'll tell you a little about herself.
Oh, Zena, you're muted.
Thanks. So Andrea J. Loney is going to be our first speaker. She is the author of Bunny Bear, illustrated by Carmen Saldana. Picture book biography, Take a Picture of Me, James Vanderzee, illustrated by Keith Mallet. Double Bass Blues, illustrated by Rudy Gutierrez. And her upcoming books include 2 more biographies, including Curve and Flow, the elegant vision of LA architect Paul R. Williams, illustrated again by Keith. I think it's Mallet or Mallet, I'm not sure.
All right, thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, so right now, I am going to switch over to my Zoom. I see some people wondering what they have open here. I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully if you can see it, because I will not be able to see you, you will say, see it, and then someone who's on the mic will say, see it, and I'll be able to be sure that you can all see all of this. So can you see my screen? Yeah, all right, let's go. All right, so I'm gonna start over here. And Yeah, big topic, huh? So racial diversity and white culture using picture books for anti-racist teaching. And there's 4 of us, and we're going to cover all of this in a very short period of time. It's a really big topic, but at least for my part of here, for my purposes, it comes down to 2 essential practices, right? So the first one is decentering whiteness as the default in our classrooms. I think that that's a really important thing to do. And it's important for a couple of reasons, because when whiteness is centered in the classroom, is like the default of the classroom, it can be alienating, demoralizing, and damaging to students who are not white, in the sense that they're in a space where it doesn't really feel like it's reflecting them, responding to them, noticing them, that sort of thing. You know, all students of all ages, I've found, want to feel like they're included, right? Also, it can be misleading or undermining for white students when they are out in a world that is not necessarily automatically organized around them and their concerns. And sometimes it can lead some students to feel like, you know, if there's a circle of people, they're supposed to be in the center of it. And that's not always necessarily so. So basically, we feel that it just doesn't serve this millennium students who play and live and interact in a diverse global society. And I think about that all the time over the course of my teaching career, as I'm watching how students connect with each other and connect with people around the world through the internet and everything. It just seems that having textbooks and having books that we read in class that are just centered in this one specific culture hasn't been serving everybody. And even as a computer science teacher, we've gone through and found different texts that are more reflective of the students that we have in our classes in Los Angeles and Los Angeles Trade Technical College. In our case, it's mostly Asian, Black, and Hispanic students. And we found ways for the work that we share with them to kind of reflect their cultures. And we can definitely see a difference in how the students connect with the work, okay? The other one is a little bit harder for all of us, I think, certainly for me sometimes, rooting out implicit bias in ourselves and others. Because the bottom line is we live in a society organized around the principles of white supremacy. And so that means that most of us are going to grow up with some sort of implicit bias, as we're bombarded with it all the time. It has to be a conscious choice to move away from it, right? So we might notice it while checking names on a class roster, while choosing which books to add to our classroom, or even while grading an essay. And I know that that's where I first noticed it. I've been teaching for years, mostly as a trainer, but when I got to the point where I really had to do grading and I'm going through this grade list all the time, I noticed, why do I think this about the student? Wait, where did that come from? And I noticed some of my own biases. And the question I always have to ask myself is, where this story I just told myself about the student's life, is it true? Or is it the echo of, of some other story that I heard some other place? And why is that? And I kind of have to keep rooting it out myself so that I can be there for the actual person who's in front of me. So in order for us to change some of these biased stories that we tell ourselves and others, that's the root of anti-racist teaching. Just like change the story and add more stories, add enough stories so we have a variety of stories to look at a whole fully developed person, as opposed to looking at people through this lens or that lens, right? So, and the other important thing is children, like most humans, learn through stories, and children also build their basic identities through story. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about here is the Dahl study of 1947 and the power of story through that. And I don't know if some of you have already heard about this, but in 1949, researchers Mamie and Kenneth Clark conducted an experiment where they gave Black children the choice of either a white doll or a black doll to play with. And while they're giving them these dolls, they're asking them which doll is good and which doll is bad, which doll is smart and which doll is stupid. You know, and they're just dolls, but of course they're asking these questions to see what the children's bias is. And it turns out that in 1947, most of the Black children disparaged most of the Black dolls and didn't think that they were good and didn't think that they were smart and all of that. And then when at the end of the experiment, they asked them, okay, now which doll looks most like you? And when they got to that point in the experiment, so many of the children were really upset to think that the doll that they like the least basically is the one that they most identified with physically, and how upsetting that was. And this study was actually used as a part of the argument in the Brown versus Board of Education that integrated schools, because it showed the whole deal with the separate but equal wasn't really equal, right? So it's completely understandable how that happened, because if you think about 1947, I'm sure that most Black children, most children in general, were inundated with stories about beautiful, good, kind, white children. So of course, when they see the doll that represents that, that's what they're going to respond to. And the thing that was also fascinating to me about this is that they were not even able to find a Black doll in order to do the experiment. They actually took a white doll and just colored it in. So these children probably even hadn't seen that many dolls who looked just like themselves. Okay, so the thing that I think is really interesting about that, because again, these children were told stories about brown skin and people with brown skin and all of that, and they had a negative reaction to it. But I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember when there was this time where certain Black dolls were highly sought after because they had a whole different story. Let's see if I can get this one up. I'm gonna go to this one for just a moment. Does anybody remember that? The Cabbage Patch riots of 1983. I was there in New Jersey, in South Plainfield, New Jersey. Let me tell you, it was scary. There was a doll craze, and the dolls were all different races, but because people were so excited to get a Cabbage Patch doll from Babyland General in Georgia, straight from the Cabbage Patch, and it had its own little birth certificate and all that other stuff, people of all races were coming at each other to get these dolls. And you would see people, you would see white people with little Black dolls and their little kids just like, oh my gosh, I got my baby. So again, it's all about story, right? Let me step back. Now, they did run the experiment again, the doll study again in 2010, and they repeated with Black and white children. And there was still some bias, certainly bias towards dark skin, not necessarily Black people, but darker skin with the Black children. But there were a lot more Black children who were embracing of the Black dolls. But the thing is, the white children who did the study overwhelmingly were biased towards the white dolls and were overwhelmingly biased against the Black dolls. And that leads me to ask, what stories were these children hearing about Black children and Black people? How did that influence their bias? How did that influence the biases of those kids right now? Because that study was 11 years ago, right? So they're probably getting ready to enter the adult world. They're going to become teachers. They can become doctors. They can become programmers, right? How do those biases affect them? So it's all about what story's being told, and the fact that Anderson Cooper like never ages. What is up with that? You guys see that? That's so weird.
Well, and you know, it's so interesting that Anderson Cooper is a dad now himself.
Exactly.
So I wonder how that will.
Exactly. Yeah. So this leads us to the point where we need to find better stories that explore, elevate, and celebrate the lives of Black, Indigenous, Hispanic, Asian, Pacific Islander, Muslim, and other marginalized children, because children can be marginalized in lots of people can be marginalized in lots of different ways. So now that we know that we need to find the stories, what are some ways that we can find these stories? So one of the resources that I have listed here is Lee and Lowe's Educators grade level resources. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to stop my share for just a moment. Oh, look, and now I can see your faces. Hi, folks. Good to see you. I couldn't see your faces when I was sharing. I hope it was helpful. I hope some of you were having happy memories of the Cabbage Patch craze in the 80s. I know that I was. So I'm gonna, yeah, and I will put the links in there for you. So what I will do is I'm gonna go back over here and I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna share my screen. And let's see, let me get the right screen over here. Okay, so here we go. This is what I wanted to share with you. The grade level resources from Lee and Low. Lee and Low is the publisher for my book, Take a Picture of Me, James Vanderzee. And they are like the premier publisher for diverse books. I say that mostly because I love them and I work with them, but they're really amazing. And what they have is a checklist here where you can fill out what your school needs, what your classroom library needs, and they can recommend books that they think that might be useful for them. So they have the needs questionnaire, they can offer personalized assistance, they have all different kinds of leveled readers and everything. So I find that they're really useful to have. And again, they have their questionnaire and their reading levels, correlations, charts, and everything. It's like one-stop shopping over here. Plus, they just acquired required a new line of books featuring Hispanic students. So that part's really cool. So here's the other one that oh, look at the people, like it is awesome. They're awesome, right? It's wonderful. Now there is another thing here through We Need Diverse Books, and I have to admit, I opened this up not realizing it was a trial. I'm like, I'm gonna show them this thing because it was great, but you need to subscribe to it, but it's worth it. This is We Need Diverse Books, which is another organization that's pushing for diversity in children's literature. And they have something that's very similar, where it's a searchable database of diverse books. And again, you can put together, and it's free. It's got a free trial period for 2 weeks. So, you know, you might want to just take a look and see if it would be helpful for you and your classroom. And I'm gonna go here and erase my little link with it. Okay. And it's something worth looking into. All right. And I'm a little biased here because I'm a mentor for We Need Diverse Books, and I think that they are an amazing organization. Okay. And then the third thing that I'm going to share for a moment. So I'm going to once again stop my share and then go back over here to my PowerPoint. Let me do this again. Sorry. I'm getting it together here. I've been out of the classroom for a little bit, so my PowerPoint's switching skills aren't like quite where they used to be, but we're getting there. The third thing that I have listed here is the Disrupt Text on Twitter. That's another way that if you just go on Twitter and you search for the hashtag Disrupt Text, you're probably going to find a lot of great information with some people who are really, really devoted to finding diverse finding diverse books of all levels for all kids. Okay, so I want to show you some examples from my shelf. We have Anti-Racist Baby by Ibram X. Kendi, illustrated by Ashley Lukashevsky. And let's see, and of course, like the moment I go to show this to you, I have it up here on my Kindle. I think you can see some of this, just so that you can see what the picture looks like. Don't mind that ring light, it's not really there. And we have Ty's Travels by Kelly Starling's Lion, which is just a book about a boy who loves his family and has fun with his family. So it's like a Black Boy Joy book, and it's wonderful. I listed my books, Double Bass Blues and Take a Picture of Me, James Vanderzee. Basically, when I present this to schools or when I hand sell it, I have kids find themselves in this story. Do you play a musical instrument? Do you love your grandparents? Have you ever had a trip to see your grandparents? That's what Double Bass Blues is about. Take a Picture of Me, James Vanderzee is basically about a boy who wanted to learn how to draw, or wanted to learn how to capture the expressions of his family's faces better. So he became a photographer because he just got tired of trying to draw. And then the last one I have here is Red Shoes. And this one over here, you can see it. Red Shoes is a lovely book by our friend Karen English that shows diversity within diversity. It shows a picture of a little girl and a Christian family who has a pair of shoes that go off to a kid in Africa who's from a Muslim family. So it shows the diversity within the diversity. And I think that that's important too, so that children can feel like they're being represented in their fullness. Okay. And that's pretty much what I wanted to cover with you. I want to hand this off to my dear friend Benson Shum. I'm going to stop my share here, and I am going to add Benson's books over here in the chat as he gets ready to share his presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrea. I'm just going to share my screen, and please let me know if you can see it properly. Give me 1 second. Let's see. Okay, you see like a galaxy screen, right? Okay. There you go. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Andrea, for introduction. First, I want to say thank you for having us as part of your conference. I have the utmost respect for you educators and all that you do for your students. And we're very honored to be here to speak with you today. So today I'm going to come from a different perspective, from a different lens on how, how it shapes and how we teach. So how to teach, how to promote anti-racism through animation, pop culture, and children's books, how they both influence each other, and how we can use visual medium as a tool. So I've always loved animation as a kid and still do as an adult. It was the drawing and illustrations that came to life that drew me in. So when I was growing up, what I see now in the media is very different, and same thing in books. I loved what I grew up with, but in both mediums, it shows more of what our world looks like now. So I didn't realize it until I got older, where I see myself sometimes on TV and in books. Would it have made a difference if I saw myself at an earlier age? I think it would have subconsciously. An example would be for Disney's Raya and the Last Dragon. So when we were working on this film, we wanted to make sure people were being represented correctly. We wanted to be culturally sensitive. We had cultural consultants. We double-checked our acting choices, also in our design of everything from the wall decor to costumes to character design, all the way to the food. So when the film came out, the studio showed videos of kids and their reactions, which was amazing. But what I connected mostly was seeing how the adults reacted, how they finally saw themselves. It brought like tears to a lot of us, but not because we were part of the film, but a justification that we do exist. It could be something as small as making the skin a little darker, and that can be a huge deal. So growing up, I never thought about it because what I saw on TV was just it. So how does that apply to children's books? With my book, Alex's Good Fortune, so when it came out, I started to hear stories of kids connecting because they were seeing themselves in it, as well as wanting to share and be proud of their background, and not because it was different from the norm. Another kid-led author reached out to me and shared a story that she wished she had a book like this growing up, because when her parents, when they all moved to America, they had to assimilate, which meant they didn't celebrate all the traditions that her parents had and did back at home, because they wanted her to fit in. And for me, there was a moment when I was painting Alex's hair. Like I smiled a little. I know it sounds really cheesy, but it was the feeling that I was painting her hair black, when subconsciously, maybe I was always painting hair and drew hair that was of a lighter color. So maybe when we take a look at our book selections, could we diversify our selection visually? Which brings me to a topic of illustrations. So when it comes to choosing books for our classroom, could we diversify the books visually, as well as choosing authors of color, which I'm sure a lot of us are doing? Maybe consider looking for an illustrator of color. Like authors, illustrators also bring a different lens to the story and books. So maybe we could talk about why an illustrator chose certain colors, why those added details like made it all that much enriched that the author didn't mention in the text. So an example would be I Drew a Popo, written by Livia Blackburn and illustrated by Julia Kua. So it's a story about a little girl missing her grandmother who lives in Taiwan. So Livia's text is really heartwarming and Julia's illustration really brought it to life. Her color palette, style, and detail she added. So for me, it was that classic block printing feel with the limited colors. The colors of the greens and the reds really reminded me of the Asian books that I grew up with reading as a child. And there are certain things like the Asian calendar in the center at the bottom there with the number 2. I haven't seen that drawn in books ever. And that was what I saw every day going to my grandmother's house. The type of food that Julia illustrated was what I grew up eating as well. Like Taiwanese food is amazing if you haven't tried it. So I think those little details make a big difference for kids to see. For those who aren't familiar with those foods, maybe they will start to ask questions. Why was that drawn? Why did that author choose those specific words? Especially with picture books where every word is chosen for a reason when the word count is so little. So in books and in medias, we are so used to the standard 3-act structure, big dramatic action, big dramatic problem, which is great. I use that in my storytelling as well. But wouldn't it be great if we can expose different types of stories? So an example for an animated film would be Mirai, written and directed by Mamoru Hosada, let's pronounce that correctly. So it's a story about a boy grasping the existence of his younger sister that came to his life, how he deals with it, his curiosity, his frustration, and not getting the attention he's used to and so forth. So it's kind of a slice of life type of story. And we got the opportunity to see this at the studio and the director was there. So what I found interesting was the first thing the director said was, he apologized. He apologized for his film. That is not typical. There's no explosions, no climactic action. It's a quiet film, a personal film. And I've never heard a director speak this way, especially with other creators. And I think it's because he knows the American market and he wants to make sure that they're aware it's not what they're used to. And they may get up and just leave, you know. So afterwards, I thought and discussed this with my colleagues afterwards and was saddened to feel he needed to apologize for this amazing film. I think if we expose our generations to all types of views and stories we ingest, will make us more aware and understanding of other cultures and perspectives. So it's the idea of being exposed to different types of stories. And I feel the same with children's books. So an example I would say would be with Watercress, written by Adrian Wang and illustrated by Jason Chin. So the book is about a girl being embarrassed by picking watercress from the side of the road to cook at home, getting free hand-me-down clothes, and not understanding why her parents did that. Like I grew up with a lot of hand-me-down clothes from my cousins and so forth. So the book touches upon like being bullied, embarrassed when kids tease them, and hopefully it will give a lens that make kids understand why a child doesn't have the latest fashions or the newest gadgets, and hopefully it will question our views. Another visual tool would be school visits. So you may already know this, but if the school has the resources, maybe consider bringing an author and illustrators of colors make all the difference. Why school visits are so important is because it helps break down stereotypes. You can travel through an author and illustrator to their world, through their books, and through their voice. Everybody brings their own culture and experiences through those doors. Students will get an insight on how their stories came to be. Was the story inspired by their experience? What was their view and why? Another layered experience that kids will get would be when the creators read their stories. Like, where did they emphasize those words and why did they emphasize those words? Or the up and downs of the crescendos when they're reading it. As educators, we can make them global travelers within their own classroom walls, which is pretty amazing. So I just want to leave just with a few questions to think about. When looking for children's books, are there books that aren't classics that we can read? What is being written now? How are they different? Do the titles you have represent the students in your classroom? And if your class isn't diverse, are there stories that they could be exposed to that isn't something that they're familiar with? And that's my little bit. So I just want to say thank you so much for listening. And I hope that was helpful. You can find more information about me and my books on my website and on my Instagram. and Twitter. And now I want to introduce you to the wonderful Sharon Langley, who's a children's book author of A Right to Remember with Amy Nathan, illustrated by the award-winning artist, Floyd Cooper. Thank you. Oh.
Thank you, Benson. You know, it's so amazing when you work with someone and share with them, and then you have a chance to learn more about them and their work. Thank you, Benson. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see here, one moment. And don't mind I have a lot of stuff here. Here we go. Okay. So in thinking about how to share and what to share today, I thought about a TED Talk that I happened to come across a few months ago. And it was from the wonderful Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum. And it's available if you would like to see the TED Talk in its fullness. But in summary, at the time her son was 3 years old and he was attending a preschool where he was the only African-American child. And so one afternoon when she picked him up, he asked her, "Mom, is my skin brown because I drank chocolate milk?" And I thought that this was such an interesting way for us to think about anti-racism and decentering whiteness, because even though he was 3 years old, he was thinking about himself in the environment where he was. And his classmate, who actually gave him this theory, who was a white classmate, was thinking about it too. And so I guess part of what I wanted to say about this is that sometimes children, our students, are thinking about questions that we haven't approached in our teaching, either directly or indirectly. And it's only when we either maybe overhear their conversations or listen to their questions do we realize, oh, they're trying to understand something about their world. Maybe they're trying to understand something about themselves, or maybe they're trying to understand something about a classmate. So I liked what I saw in this talk, because I realized that both her child and the classmate who made the comment were trying to make sense of their world, meaning there's something different about my classmate, and I think that this is what makes the difference. I'm trying to understand how that happened. I like chocolate milk. Will my skin become brown? And I also feel free to share what I know, even though my thoughts about it are not exactly accurate. Well, Dr. Tatum explained to her son, it's actually because you have something in your skin called melanin, and everybody has some. You happen to have more than your friend, Eddie. Well, let's think about this. Another reason I think that I like this approach is because it acknowledges questions that a young person has. Sometimes, and I can be guilty of this, oh, that's silly. No, of course not. And then move on. Well, but the student still has a question. The child still has a question. So treating that question as though it's important, it's valuable, and it's worth exploring. And then underneath that may be a concern. Is there something about me that's different? Will it change? So having maybe a very matter of fact approach to questions and concerns that students or children have, right? There's nothing wrong with asking questions about differences. There's nothing wrong about exploring those differences. It's not a shame and we don't talk about those things, right? It's a question and I need an answer. I feel trust because I'm bringing my thoughts to you. And I'm also trusting that what you're going to tell me is accurate and factual, right? On our resource sheet, there was one spot that asked, did we have any probing questions? And I think the idea of having accurate and factual information is really important for students. If you have a student in your class who is maybe one among a large group of other children, right? I need accurate information, either about myself or about my classmate. And I also need that information to be age appropriate. When Dr. Tatum told her son that he had melanin in his skin, and that's what made his skin brown. And she also explained to him, you know, you actually probably have the most melanin in your skin. That was accurate, right? As he grows up, that's something that will stand the test of time in their conversations. Now, I'm sure that she did not go into the cells and them being activated and, you know, by sunlight. I'm sure that she did not go into quite that much detail because at the time he was 3. But that's certainly something that can be built upon as time goes on. And then the last reason that I really appreciated the response was because it was timely. You asked a question, and as the adult, I felt prepared to answer. And I would say that if you don't feel prepared to answer, you know, that's not something that I know right now, but I bet we can find out. Okay. And so it takes me to the 4 goals of anti-racist teaching. And I think that these are did I lose my screen share? Okay. I think these are age appropriate and they can apply to every child, although this particular book called 4 Goals of Anti-Racist Teaching by Louise Derman Sparks, Julie Olson Edwards, and Catherine M. Goins. It talks a lot about anti-racist teaching for young children and ourselves, meaning that we're continuing to learn also. We're continuing to expand our understanding. When I was in elementary school, I would say that my class was probably racially mixed in terms of Black and white. But when I became a teacher, my class of students was more than racially mixed. I had students whose skin was brown, but their background was not African American. My students, I had a large group of Belizean students. And as a teacher, I needed to be able to distinguish not just skin color, but also culture, heritage, tradition, right? So it helped me to begin to see not just my students in one way, but to drill down and be able to see them more deeply, right? I had a large, not a large group, but a sizable population of students who were Korean. So that also meant that I needed to broaden my classroom library to include other students so that they too could see themselves, right? So in their 4 goals, they talk about every child should have the opportunity to feel good about themselves, right? And that can be supported by the kinds of books that we choose, right? And it goes on to talk about multiple cultural groups. So what I was trying to say in the beginning is not so much Black and white, but being aware of gender, being aware of race, ethnicity, or class, because every kid should have the opportunity to feel good about themselves. Promoting comfortable, empathetic interaction with people from diverse backgrounds. So an opportunity to learn about people and their differences. Be able to look and think about bias and to be able to recognize bias and injustice. And then the fourth goal, cultivating the ability to stand up either individually or with others against bias and injustice. So so not every book that you choose will have all four of those, but they might have some. And that can help because not every story will address bias or injustice. But if I look at it as sort of a continuum, I am every good thing, that's probably an opportunity for my Black and African American students to feel good about themselves. It's probably also another opportunity to learn in a positive, empathetic way about someone who might not be like me if I'm not Black or African American. My hair is a garden. Again, another opportunity, maybe for a Black young lady, or maybe for a young lady from another culture whose hair is both seen as a blessing and a burden, right? My hair is a garden, an opportunity to feel good about myself, an opportunity to learn about someone else, right? And then Be a Friend by Selena Yoon. Be a Friend is the story of Dennis, portrayed as a mime, who really doesn't communicate verbally. And I love this story because although Selena's character isn't necessarily represented as a student with a disability, it's possible. She leaves it open for your interpretation, right? Because not all diversity is racial. Some diversity is learning and interacting differently. So an opportunity to address a student who seems to be not included, right? And to take action. And then, of course, my book, which does address bias and injustice and the way that even children can address that. So thank you so much for allowing me a few moments to share with you. And now I would like to introduce you to my colleague, Zena M. Pliska.
Thanks, Sharon. So my goal today is to encourage you to disrupt white supremacy, using picture books to decenter white culture and to recenter diversity in all the ways that the previous speakers have said. I'm going to attempt to. Okay, so I put in the chat to please get a pencil and paper. I hope that you did. And we're gonna just take a moment to identify your 10 favorite books. You know those books, the ones that you use every year without fail. And we're gonna think about who are the protagonists. So if you can make a list of those, so you have that list. And in the spirit of discovery, we're going to look at how balanced is your list, because the goal here is balance. It's not about feeling badly about what you use. It's about finding the balance. So what percentage of the picture books have non-white or BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, or people of color protagonists? What percentage have animal protagonists that tell their story through a white dominant culture lens? And what percentage have white protagonists? And most importantly, what did you discover about that list of 10 books? And if you want to share that with us in the chat, that would be great. Okay. Now, if you could flip that paper over, we're going to make a list of all the BIPOC, all the stories that you use with, again, Black or Indigenous or people of color protagonists. And as you think of that list or write that list down, what percentage highlight universal themes like human experiences, friendship, or family relationships? Those themes that you can find with any protagonist. But which ones of the stories of BIPOC protagonists focus on that? What percentage focus on the struggle, trauma, resistance, or resilience of BIPOC people? And what percentage are about culture as expressed through food, holidays, traditions, or rituals? And again, what did you discover? Is there a balance, or do you lean only into one area? If you're leaning only in one area, is it perpetuating a single narrative? Again, where are you balanced? So I'm going to just show some numbers very quickly, a graph. This was from 2018. I think the numbers speak for themselves. These are diversity in children's books, 2018. And these are the percentages of books that are depicting, characters from diverse backgrounds. On the left-hand side, those are the BIPOC protagonists. You see the 27% are animals or other, like trucks or other inanimate objects or insects, like my book, Hello Little One, which is about a butterfly and a caterpillar, and 50% are white. Again, I think the numbers speak for themselves. What stands out for me is that on the left-hand side, if you add up all those numbers of the BIPOC protagonists, that number is less than the 27% of animals and other inanimate insects or other inanimate objects. 2019, numbers change a little bit. Again, not that much. You still have far fewer protagonists of color. And so again, that shows imbalance. Decentering white culture and recentering diversity is extremely important for children of color. And I think that we are beginning to acknowledge this, both in the kidlit publishing industry as well as in education. These conversations are beginning to happen, which is encouraging. And I think many of you are familiar with this statement by Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop. Books are sometimes windows, offering views of the world that may be real or imagined, familiar or strange. These windows are also sliding glass doors, and readers have only to walk through in imagination to become part of whatever world has been created and recreated by the author. When lighting conditions are just right, however, a window can also be a mirror. Literature transforms human experience and reflects it back to us. And in that reflection, we can see our own lives and experiences as part of the larger human experience. Reading then becomes a means of self-affirmation, and readers often seek their mirrors in books. As an author, I just sent my editor my author's note for my upcoming picture book, Egyptian Lullaby, about daily life in Cairo. And as I was writing that author note, I realized that Arab children will see themselves I hope that Arab children will see themselves in the Egyptian American protagonist. My deepest hope, however, is to normalize the Arab culture for the dominant white culture to break through destructive stereotypes. And I've taught all over LA in predominantly Black communities and Latinx and Mexican American communities. But currently, many of my students on the west side of the city, where I now teach, are white. And I can see that it is equally important for white students to see themselves in a different way, to understand that they live in a diverse world and that they are not more valuable than BIPOC children. Much following what Andrea J. Loney talked about, if we don't address this by normalizing different experience, that reinforces their privileged place in the world. If we don't bring stories into balance, nothing will change. How can we expect people who identify with the white culture to see themselves as anything but entitled and at the top of the hierarchy? We keep reading about internal biases and balancing the lens in which we portray the world to them. Imagine picking up a camera with a telephoto lens. That lens draws our eye to one small part of the picture and exaggerates its value, while a wide angle lens extends beyond the telepathic lens. It extends beyond the telephoto lens's margins, bringing the marginalized out of the margins and including them in the whole picture in its totality. No one should feel marginalized, and it's up to us to change the lens by bringing balance. As a kindergarten teacher, I am constantly evaluating my reading choices. I have discovered that I don't include enough books with BIPOC protagonists. I have an awful lot of books, and I am guilty of having written one myself about insects as protagonists. I have an awful lot of these books that feature animals in stories that are told through a white lens. And many of the stories that I read with BIPOC protagonists are stories of struggle and resistance and resilience, probably because I'm an activist myself, so I'm drawn to those kinds of stories. But unfortunately, that reinforces a single narrative. So it's totally out of balance. So my own discoveries about myself and my internal biases have led to classroom changes. Last year, I really just knuckled down and I really made sure I really looked at the books I was using, especially to start my school year. And I really made sure that I was looking at books that have both BIPOC authors as well as illustrators. And so last year I began the very first day of school. I read Jacqueline Woodson's The Day You Begin because it is about starting off. Another great book for that first day of school, those opening moments with those students when you set the tone for the year, is The Proudest Blue. Again, another story about the first day of school by Ibtihaj Mohammed and illustrated by Hatem Ali, who is the illustrator on my upcoming book, Egyptian Lullaby. Dreamers, written and illustrated by Juji Morales. I use this book to talk about the magic of the library, because in this book, that's what gets her through her journey as an immigrant with her baby in the United States, as she finds the library. So this is a universal theme. Libraries are magical. Eyes That Kiss in the Corners, and Carmela Full of Wishes are both books about family and specifically sibling relationships. Again, very universal themes. And We Are Water Protectors The activist in me is absolutely drawn to this. It talks about taking care of the earth. But again, written by a Native author, Carol Lindstrom, illustrated by Michaela Goad. And so, again, that perspective is different than the white-centered perspective. Again, it's a balance. I don't read these stories every day. My list is balanced, and I have to work at that every day. So thank you so much. Here's how you can find me if you want to. And I hope that we have given you tools and resources that support you and guide you to disrupt white supremacy. I don't know if we have any time for Q&A, but I'm going to check the chat.
So unfortunately, Zena, we do not have time for Q&A. I would like to just thank you all for